In our previous video, we saw the theory for one-way as well as duplex contracts in WCF services. We also saw a simple practical demonstration of how to use one-way contract in WCF services. This video is a continuation of the same video. In this video, we will see how to implement duplex contracts or two-way contracts in WCF services. So if you remember, in order to implement the one-way contract, what we did is we created a simple WCF service first. So if you remember the previous video, in our WCF service, we had created a very simple function here called as wait for some time, right? And this function we had exposed via an interface, iService1 interface, okay? And the WCF client was actually consuming this service via this iService1, and the operation contract of iService1 was marked with one-way attribute as true, is one-way as true, right? Now for duplex contract, what we have to do is we have to create one more interface. You can give whatever name you want to give. I'll give the name as iClient. This interface will be used by the WCF server to communicate back to the client to say that he has, he is finished or he has completed his processing. So in other words, for duplex contract, what we have to do is that we have to do everything what we have done till now for the one-way contract. So we have to create a simple function. We have to mark our operation contract as one-way equal to true, and adding to it, we have to create one more interface called as iClient or whatever name you want to give. And via this interface, the WCF server will make a communication back to the client when the processing is finished. So let's see practically how we can do this. So we will take the same project which we had created for one-way contract. So if you remember, we had created a simple WCF service one-way, two-way, and in the WCF service one-way, two-way, we had a simple function here called as wait for some time, and we had marked this function as is one-way equal to true. And then in the implementation, we had put a simple thread.sleep. Now what we would like to do here is that once this thread.sleep finishes, right, we would like to send the alert to the client saying that this function is complete. This function has completed execution. So how do we do that? So the first thing, as we said previously, that we have to create one more interface, which will help us to communicate back to the client. So let's go ahead and create the interface here. So let's go to iService1 and let's create a simple interface here. We'll give the name as iClient callback. So because this interface will help us to call back to the client saying the function has been executed successfully or the method has been executed successfully, and this will be done via the completed method, right? And definitely to consume this interface in the client, we have to ensure that this has been marked as operation contract. So we'll say that, service contract, operation contract for the method. So service contract, and here it is, operation contract, right? So there we are. So let's just go and build this. So everything is successful there. Now the next thing is we have to give the reference of iClient callback to the service contract saying, this is the mechanism by which we will call back to the client. So how do you do that? If you go to the service contract, right, there is an attribute here called as the callback contract. You can see that. So we have to specify this iClient callback in the callback contract, right? So we'll say callback contract is equal to type of iClient callback. So what this signifies is that iService1 will actually use iClient callback interface to call back to the client. Now the next step is, let's first go and build this. Everything is okay. Now the next step is we have to go to our behind code, that is the svc.cs, and over here we would like to raise the event. We would like to go and call this completed event and notify the client that this processing has been complete. So for that, what we need to do is we have to say operation context dot current dot get callback channel. What is a callback channel? iClient callback, right? And raise the event dot completed. So this operation contacts context.current.get callback channel and invoking the completed function will ensure that the event is raised back to the client saying that the wait for some time function has been executed successfully. So let's go and build this. So everything looks fine here. Now this is just the 20% part of the story. Now the biggest problem here is the bindings. Currently I am using WCF 4.0 and in WCF 4.0 the default binding is basic HTTP binding. Now bindings like basic HTTP binding, WS HTTP bindings, they do not have the capability of making a call from the WCF service to the client back. So in other words, they do not have the capability of making a callback to the client. So for that we have to use some different kind of binding. So let's see that what we can do for that. So in other words, we have to go and change the binding. Now in order to change the binding, we have to make changes in the web config file. Till now in all the videos of your WCF services, we have been changing the web config manually. Okay, and the only reason why we were doing manually is so that you can understand things better. But there's a very easy way of doing the configuration changes in the web config file for WCF services, that is by using the WCF service configuration editor. So let's use this configuration editor and add a new binding which will help us to make callback from the WCF service to the client. So the first thing is, let's go ahead and first take the path where this web config file is stored. So let me just take the path here. So that's my web config file. So this is stored in this location. So let me just copy this location. Now let's go to the configuration editor. Let's open this and let's go and open the config file from this location. So let me do a Control V here, and that's my web.config file. So let's open it. So the first step is we have to go and add a new binding. So let's click add new binding configuration. Now you can see that there are different kind of bindings over here, and as I said that the bindings is one of the very important aspect when we talk about callbacks. Okay, so bindings like WS HTTP binding, web HTTP binding, or must be basic HTTP binding will not help us to make a callback from the WCF service to the client. There's one binding you can see over here called as a WS dual HTTP binding, and this binding has the capability of making a call from the WCF service to the client. So let's select this binding and let's press OK, and let's give some nice name to this, duplex binding, right? And rest things will keep as it is, right? And let's save this. Now the next thing is we need to go and add a protocol mapping. So you can see that there is a element here called as a protocol mapping. Now what happens in WCF 4.0 is by default the binding is basic HTTP binding. So what we need to do is we want to use currently the duplex binding. So what I'll do is I'm going to go and delete this basic HTTP binding from here, and I'm going to add a new binding over here, which is our duplex binding or the dual binding, and I'm going to use the current configuration which I've just created, binding configuration, and the scheme is HTTP because I'm going to use the HTTP protocol. Alright, so step 1 we added the binding, step 2 we went ahead and we configured the protocol mapping. So let me go and save this again. Now step 3 is we have to go and add our services. So let's go and add a new service, and the service type is currently our iService1. So let me just select this service 1. I'm going to open this. Now inside this service we need to go and add an endpoint. So right click, add a new service endpoint. Let's give some name to this, my endpoint, whatever name you want to give here. The binding configuration will be what the contract, right? So the next thing is we have to specify the contract for the endpoint. So let me again go here and select WCF service 1, and our contract is iService1. Don't select the iClient callback. So let's select iService1, and let's again save this file. Save. the binding cannot be empty. Yes, that's right. So we need to select WS dual HTTP binding, and we also need to select the configuration. So save yes. So we added the binding, we added the protocol mapping, we added the service, the service model, and inside the service model we added the endpoint. So we are done with all the configuration what we need to do in order to implement the WS dual HTTP binding. Now if you close this and if you go to your web config file, alright, a lot of things have changed. So you can see that he has gone ahead and added a lot of things here. You can see that he has gone ahead and added the service, he has added an endpoint, he has added this new WS dual HTTP binding, and a lot of changes he has done here, you know, from the aspect of enabling the WS dual HTTP binding. So let's go and compile this project. So everything is fine there. Now the next thing is we have to go and update our client, because we have done a lot of changes here in the web config file. So let's go ahead and do a update service reference in the console WCF client here. So everything is fine there. It has updated the service references. Now the next step is we have to implement that I callback, that I client which we have created right into our WCF client here. So the first thing is, let's go ahead and import the system.service model namespace, right, and let's create a simple class here called as class client callback, and this callback, this client callback will implement the interface I service1 callback. You can see that. Okay, now remember that the name over there what we are given right in our I service1 was I client callback, and you can see over here the name is I service1 callback. So the name is different, you know, but it's this interface is actually pointing to the same interface what we have created for callback. So let's go ahead and implement this interface. So right click, implement interface. So implement interface. Yeah, and what I'll do is in this completed method I'll just put a simple console.write line here saying that server has finished processing. We can still see some errors over here. You can see if I move my mouse on this, it tells me that you know, it's expecting a callback. So if you see this service client, it's actually expecting a callback over here, and this callback is nothing but this class what we have just recently created, that is client callback. So we have to pass the object of this callback to this service client service1 client constructor. So let's go ahead and do that. So for that, first thing is we have to go and create the instance context object. So o1 is equal to new instance context, and over here we'll say new client callback. So we'll actually give the object of this client callback to this new instance context object, and this object we have to then pass to this constructor, right? So there we are. Now let's go ahead and build this, build solution, right? So everything looks proper here now. So let's go ahead and run the client. So what should happen now is the wait for some time method will be called, and because this wait for some time method is one-way attribute, the client will move ahead with the execution, and later when the server finishes his operation, he will actually make a callback by calling the completed method which we have implemented here in the client, and we should see this console write line that server has finished processing. So what should happen is the client will call the WCF service. The WCF service will go in a 10 seconds hang mode, while the client will go ahead and display the client is executed, and then later when the server finishes, the server will display the server has finished processing by making a callback to the client through the completed method. So let's do a control F5. So the first thing what should happen is we should see that the client has completed, client has executed that sentence, and after 10 seconds we should see the server has completed. So that's this sentence, server has finished processing. So it's almost 10 seconds. What happened? Let's go back. Let's see what happened. iService1. Oh, okay. There's one mistake which we have done. The operation contract of the iClient callback should also be is one-way true, which is not here currently. So let me just go back and correct this. It's good that these kind of errors happen, so that you understand much better. So let's build the solution. And also we need to ensure that we have to go back and update the service reference, because we have made a big change here. So let me go and do update service reference. And now let me go back and again run my code. So as usual, first the client is executed. That message is displayed. After 10 seconds, now the server will make a callback to the completed function, and there we are. So that is the callback message which has come from the WCF server to the client. So I hope that you have enjoyed this video. So this complete video series of duplex and one-way contract we had divided into two parts. In the first video, we talked about the theory of one-way as well as duplex contracts, and we also saw a simple example of how to implement one-way contract. And then in the second video, we saw a simple example of duplex contract. So I hope that you enjoyed this complete series. And see you further again in WCF question answer video series. Thank you very much.